I first went to art school in 1965 when I was 17 and wasn't particularly happy there. There's been a big revolution in art education. I think we were all a bit confused. And in particular, I would have liked to have worked with projections and environmental works. Happenings were the big thing then. And what I could do was either be a painter, a printmaker, or a sculptor. And I was frustrated. But I persevered with the course, and in 1967 I did the drawing that you can see here at the top of the screen. And I pinned it on the wall. I did it at home, pinned it on the wall, looked at it, and found myself being very impressed by it for a number of reasons. One was I knew that I hadn't derived this from somebody else's work. This wasn't a copy, or it wasn't even influenced by any other artist that I knew of at the time. And so I heard my own voice as an artist for the first time, and as many of you will know, for a creative person, that's a really important moment in your life. And a few weeks after this, I showed it at the annual Crit and talked enthusiastically about it, and afterwards the head of department very kindly said, "Paul, I don't think you're cut out for a career as an artist. You need to look elsewhere." So I dropped out of art school, and it wasn't until about 2 years later when Mary Martin won the John Moores Prize in Liverpool, where I was living, with this work, Cross. And seeing her work, I realised that I was an artist, because she reassured me that I was working in the right direction. And that was another great moment in my life. And another work I did at that time, which really spelt the way for the future, was this gouache. This is a reconstruction. It's an octagonal tile that's rotated randomly to create a more complex image. And I guess one of the things that came out of this was an interest in using very, very simple elements, but lots of them, not just to make a more complex image, because that goes without saying, but to make something where, if you like, the whole was greater than the sum of the parts, which what I would have said in those days. And of course, much later, I discovered the word emergence. So I guess my whole career now, from this point, has been looking at creative artworks that have that potential, that emergent potential, to be more than these simple elements that they're constructed from. Around that time I saw Cybernetic Serendipity, and I dropped out of college because there was no future for me as an artist, apparently. And a friend, Jim McCritchie, had set up a light show called Nova Express. I joined him, and we became very successful. We played with all the major bands. And this is one of the glass slides that I made somewhere 1968 maybe, and it was discovered last year under somebody's bed in an almshouse in Rotherhithe in South London, and it still works amazingly. So that's a little blast from the past. And I think the things that I learned from the light show was not to be precious. We were there to entertain an audience. We were making visual artifacts to entertain and things, and that was an important learning for me. The other one that we were including works that had scientific, if you like, technical elements. We were using hydrodynamics, thermodynamics, moire patterns. We were looking at cognition through the use of lenses and moire patterns and so on. And so here's another slide from that time. The importance of chance, just these chance things would happen and you'd adopt them and use them immediately, and this interaction you had with the band in real time. And that was an important part of the learning curve. And through this I met Bill Harp. Bill had founded a community arts centre, I think the first in England, called the Blackie in Liverpool, and he invited Jim and I to move to Liverpool and be artists in residence at the Blackie. And through him I met Meredith Monk, did lights with her, Frederick Ruski, Electronica Music of Viva. He knew all of the art and tech people of the day. he knew Namjoon Pike, Pierre Henry, and many of the other pioneers, and he introduced me to many of them. And it was thanks to Bill's mentorship. I'm just wondering if I've got another slide there. No, it was thanks to Bill's mentorship that like I said, I made the transition from being kind of hick provincial art student to a slightly more cosmopolitan artist, professional artist. The other thing that happened at that time, I might go back, that's a more relevant slide for this bit. Somebody had come back from Amsterdam with some very pure lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, and I took a large dose and had this amazing, profound experience. I was going into my own body, looking at muscles and joints and the mechanics of the body, the blood flow, the fluid flows, etc. And I had models for that. At school, I'd done physics, I'd done mechanics, I'd done hydrodynamics, all of that kind of stuff. But then at one point I got into my nervous system and I travelled up a nerve to the spinal cord, and then I travelled up the spinal cord and into my brain. I had no model for that. I was just in awe in this huge cavern that was full of all these different frequencies and harmonics that were changing and shifting all the time. And the next thing I remember is waking up the next morning, and I was absolutely certain, without any doubt, that I had to learn about computers. I'd seen them at Cybernetic Serendipity. I knew they were going to be powerful tools for me to use, but that experience told me that they were essential. I had to engage with computational processes to try and understand this amazing experience I'd had, seeing my own mind from the outside in. And so I went to Liverpool Art School. Catherine talks about this process in her book, A Computer in the Art Room, where as a cost-saving exercise, the government had forced these independent colleges, College of Art, College of Engineering, College of Fashion Textiles, College of Printing, to amalgamate as a single financial entity called a polytechnic. And the upshot of that was that you could go to art college and then cycle across town to another building, which was the engineering faculty, and ask to get taught how to program computers. And so I took advantage of that. This is very similar to the first computer I ever used. It's an ICL 1900 series. It was the main computer for the university, for the Polytechnic. And remember, these things cost a huge amount of money, millions of pounds, and the universities could only afford to have one of them. And now I've got 14 computers in this room. It's hard to think of an entire university with just one computer. And of course it wasn't very powerful. I think a modern wristwatch is probably more powerful than this entire computer that you're seeing here. And a friend called Ken Lowe, a lecturer in the maths department, taught me to program. Now, he'd studied his PhD with Richard Dawkins in Bristol. He was really into cybernetics, and he introduced me to the whole concept of cybernetics, cyberneticians like Stafford Beer, general systems theory, and so on. Wonderful, wonderful man. And that was batch processing, punch cards, on a computer that looked not dissimilar to this. And the other computer I worked on at that time was in the engineering department, where they had the PDP-8 computer, and that was just an amazing machine. It was 12 bits. You can see actually the 12 switches here. Each one is a bit in the word, and it had 4K of memory and 11 instructions, and it was just a wonderful machine to use. And so I worked with these machines, and this is an early drawing I did. Again, it's one of my better known pieces because it was acquired by the Victorian Albert as part of the Patrick Prince collection. And again, this is this idea of they're very simple elements, reused randomly, but there's emergent properties. Things appear out of the image that weren't put there intentionally by me. And the other thing that I completed at Liverpool, thanks to winning a competition, was the Northwest Export Award. This was made for the Confederation of British Industry, and many of their companies, Rolls-Royce Motor Cars, built the actual framework for me. Plessey, the electronic company, did the logic design, and on the left you can actually see I actually built that, the electronics, the two circuit boards that drove it, and the three lights at the top that you can see are like a worm, and it can make a decision to go left or right, and as the new one comes on, the old one turns off. So this little worm perambulates around the display, and thanks to a number of random functions, clocks out of phase and stuff like that, it didn't repeat its behavior. It could go on forever without any long-term repetition of its behavior. And this was the first real-time generative artwork that I made out of discrete logic. It's and that was I think 1976 I did that. So 1977 I graduated with a first-class honours degree in sculpture, which was kind of weird because I've never even considered myself as being a sculptor. And one of the tutors I'd had at Liverpool, Dave Saunders, was co-founder of the UK Systems Group with Geoffrey Steele, and he said, look, another member of the Systems Group, Malcolm Hughes, has just set up a computer department at the Slade School of Art, one of the major postgraduate schools in England. Why don't you apply for it? And of course I did. I think 200 of us applied and 5 got accepted. It was very competitive. And here's the Slade. Oh no, sorry, that's the logic diagram for the Northwest Export Award, and it's one of my best favourite drawings. I really like it. But here's the Slade computer. So here again, it's hard to imagine when we've got things like Raspberry Pis. This is a Raspberry Pi here, a little computer that's so powerful that this had 16K of memory. It originally came with a paper tape. I didn't have an operating system. Later we got the blue box at the bottom, which is a 5 megabyte hard drive, and that cost as much as a house. I needed 4 people to lift it up. Teletype, mechanical keyboard for input-output, the storage oscilloscope on the left for drawing on, and the plotter for your final artwork. So that was the system at the Slade, and this is when I really began. That Slade department was heavily concerned with all of the contemporary scientific theories of what we now call bottom-up artificial intelligence, artificial life. And I began to use cellular automata to interpreting them as graphic entities. And so this is a very early drawing called Life Mods. Have I got a date for it? No, I haven't. It would have been about 78 maybe. And what you see there is 6 frames in a developing animation where this cellular automata is guiding the geometry as it develops. And that's exactly what I do today. So this in many ways is one of the strongest taproots I've got for the kind of work that I've been doing ever since that point in time, is letting artificial life agents like cellular automata generate an artwork on my behalf. And this, you saw the Northwest Export Award. This is my first computational generative artwork. Again, this is, I think, 78. One of the people at the Slade that I think Catherine may have discussed, Julian Sullivan, very talented artist and electrical engineer, built a frame store. Frame stores didn't exist at that time. I think there was one in England that Cambridge University had built. And it's 96 by 96 pixels. I mean, today that's about that much of the screen, and it's only black and white. And it was very difficult to program. You had to write an assembler and be very careful of the interrupts that were feeding the display. And so this is Builderita. It's 2 concurrent processors. One is looking for pixels that are off to turn on, and the other one's looking for pixels that are on to turn off, and they both make random walks around the screen as they do that. This piece is included in my latest show at the BCS and is online at the Computer Art Society website if you want to actually see it in motion. So that's the Builderita. And the other thing that was happening at the Slade, all of us really, most of the people working there were involved in artificial intelligence, artificial life, although artificial life didn't really happen until 10 years later. And I was astonished when in 2000 I went to Sussex University to be artist in residence at one of the biggest artificial life research centres in the world, the Centre for Computational Neuroscience and Robotics. And they knew about what we were doing at the Slade. And this was a time, 2000, when nobody in the art world would remember us. I mean, you know, we'd been written off years ago. And here's these scientists who knew what we were doing. and who held us in very high regard as a major taproot of their new scientific discipline. And that was mainly because of Ed Anadovich's work, and I think Ernest's already talked about Ed. He's now recognised in the science world as the pioneer of what's called cognitive interactionism. That is, you understand things by interacting with them. This gets away from the old Cartesian mind-body split, where you're a passive observer and you're observing things. What Ed was saying was you have to interact with these things to understand them properly. And that, of course, is the whole fundamental of the modern AI. The old-fashioned AI, Minsky, Feigenbaum, Mickey, all of those people had this Cartesian split that you wrote these programs that independently sort of became intelligent through having a big database and inference engine and so on. And the A-Life people were saying, no, that doesn't work. You've got to have embodiment, you've got to have interactionism, and you've got to have a learning system. So things learn to be intelligent, they're not taught to be intelligent. And so this was happening at the Slade. We wouldn't have called it that, but that was essentially what we were doing. And the Slade was just up the road from where the Computer Arts Society met, Russell Square. I got more involved in their program. And we were also close to the Art Lab, the Russell Street Art Lab, the London Filmmakers Co-op, and Hoppy's Video Fantasy Factory, and I got involved in several of those. So that's my talk so far on my work, but I'd like now to talk about two people we had as visitors at the Slade. This is, of course, Harold Cohen and his program Aaron. Harold was by then in the States in San Diego, but he regularly came back to England to visit relatives, friends, and for other reasons. And every time he visited, he'd come in and spend a few days at the Slade. It was very informal. He wasn't a visiting lecturer on the stage to lecture to us. We'd just sit around and chat. He'd tell us about how Aaron was going. We'd show our work to him and so on. And then we'd head to the pub and have a few beers and carry on the conversation. And at this time, I think there's another... this is what he was drawing with at that time. This is the little turtle he used for drawing. So these drawings were huge. They were on the floor, and this turtle perambulated the floor. At that time, if you read his early publications, Harold claimed that he was creating a general theory of creativity in Aaron. I had a number of... I got to know him really well, and over about the 40-year period I knew him, we had lots of conversations. And those early conversations, I really challenged him on that, because what I felt he'd done, which was a great achievement, and this doesn't undermine his achievement at all, was not a general theory of creativity. What he'd managed to do was externalize his own personal creativity into an external agency called Aaron. And that's exactly what he did. And then later in life he came to agree with me, to accept that. And so Aaron still exists. His son Paul can run it, and every time he switches Aaron on, this is 8 years after he died, Aaron will still produce 100% genuine Harold Cohen drawings. And I was very honoured. His last major exhibition was in Rio de Janeiro. There's a huge exhibition in this big department store gallery called O Futura. And it was a four-person show of 4 European pioneers. And as you can see, Ernest is there, Harold's right on the right, Frida Naka on the left, and I was extremely honoured to be a part of that team. I was the fourth artist, and I'm there too. So that was Harold's last exhibition, 2015 in Rio, and the year after he sadly died. And I'd like to finish by showing you the work of Chris Briscoe, who ran the experimental department. He was a very talented artist who sadly gave up making art in the 80s. And here's one of his drawings from that time. Each of the lines that you can see there is mutually dependent on all of the other lines. So before it makes a slight increment in its behavior, it looks at what all the other lines are doing, and then they all increment at the same time, and that process is repeated. So what you've got here is a deterministic nonlinear system with highly unpredictable, or what we might call chaotic, behavior. Chris did sound pieces where each note was dependent on all of the other notes, and so I'm going to end my talk by showing a little slideshow with hopefully a soundtrack of his to demonstrate and illustrate his work. Thank you.